Digital Desk. My name is Mark Spillane. As we get rolling here in September, it's important to remember that September is the month for National Suicide Prevention Awareness. It is National Suicide Prevention Month. So in this week's Live Life Well, our very own Paul Adler takes a look at a group here in Southwest Missouri trying to help people who may be struggling, trying to help people, give them an option, a different way for them to approach, the way that they're feeling, a way to keep them safe and try and make that effort to keep people here in the Ozarks from potentially taking that step towards a potential suicide. That's in this week's Live Life Well.
So we are talking to Natasha Corkins with Burrell Behavioral Health Center, and we're talking about the second anniversary, a little past it now, of 988. And this is a line that went into place. It's called the Crisis Care Line, or the Lifeline. And it's in place to help people who are facing a crisis, maybe even contemplating suicide. So 2 years in, what's your reflection on how it's worked so far here in Missouri?
I think 2 years in, we're going pretty strong. We're still in the beginning stages of 988, just statewide and in itself. Crisis lines aren't new to Missouri, but having a centralized number, a 3-digit number, that is new. And so getting the word out that anybody can call it at any time, 24/7, 365 days a year, we're still working on that. We're doing these interviews and we're trying to get it out to everybody that when you don't know what to do, reach out.
So do you feel like more people do know about it 2 years in than they did in 2022?
I definitely think more people know about it now. Our numbers are showing they're increasing steadily over the years. So this year we had more calls. We had about 7,000 calls inbound to our center. Around 5,500 of those were crisis calls, actual crisis calls, and not just informational calls. So that's about 78%. The year prior, it was around 4,000 calls.
So break that down for me, a crisis call versus an informational call.
Mm-hmm.
So is an informational call someone who is worried about someone else?
Actually, no. That would be considered a crisis call because they are wanting to have information about someone in crisis. So an informational call would be somebody who's calling and saying, hey, I'm just testing this line out. I wanted to see what it was about, getting some education about it. We have people on the line that are willing to answer any kind of educational question that they have about the crisis line.
So when I call and I'm in crisis and I say I need help, am I talking to a volunteer, a trained volunteer, a therapist, a counselor? Who's on the other end to help me out?
So that's kind of a complicated question, and the reason why is because 988 is a national number, okay? And right now how it is routed, so when you dial that number, it is routed based off of that caller's area code and prefix. So initially, whenever you call, you do get a message saying, thank you for calling, press 1 for the Veterans Crisis Line, and the menu goes on. You can bypass that menu, by the way. If you are in crisis, you can press 0 to bypass that menu and get to your center quicker. So in Missouri, there are 6 centers that answer calls. When you call and you have the Burrell area code and prefix, you will get not a volunteer, you will get a crisis specialist who is trained. But I will tell you, all Missouri crisis specialists who answer the phone, volunteer or not, they are very trained.
Trained in how to help people and direct them to the proper resources.
Yes, absolutely.
Are you finding at this point, because it's set up in a way where you can take phone calls or text messages, are you finding that you're still getting more people want to talk versus text? Or how does that break down?
So I think on the large scale, more people do call, but there's only one center in Missouri that answers texts and chats, and that's Deaf Lead. So we have 6 centers that answer calls, 1 center that answers all of the Missouri texts and chats. Now, in the 5-year plan, there is a goal that will expand out into other centers answering those texts and chats, because we are finding that certain age demographics do tend to prefer texting during their crisis.
Now, I was looking at some data just a short time ago on the number of calls that originate locally, stay locally. Missouri has one of the best rates in the country at 94%, according to the Kaiser Family Foundation, KFF they go by now. Arkansas has one of the worst at 72%. I think there was another state at 66%. So if I'm in Arkansas and I'm watching this and I call and I get bounced somewhere, is there a chance they're going to wind up with Burrell in Springfield, Missouri? Is that what happens?
There is a chance that that could happen, just because the way the routing process goes is we want to make it to where nobody gets just hung up on. So if the way Missouri is set up is we have the 6 centers, and then Provident Behavioral Health is our backup center for the state. And let's say for some reason just there's a lot of people in crisis and they're all busy too, then they will go to our national backup, okay? But in the event, we believe in redundancies upon redundancies in crisis because we want to make sure we're getting people to someone. So in the event, yes, we've had people be routed to just a center that has an opening. So that has happened.
But the system is set up, and the hope is that if you call and you're swamped, that it's going to bounce somewhere and you're going to talk to a person who can help you.
Yes.
Because that would seem to be, to me, the worst of all worlds, where I'm reaching out for help and then I can't get anybody.
Yes. Barring any technological catastrophes, I mean, there have been known to be some with maybe a power outage or maybe like a phone system error. Yes, the people will be routed to a person.
Now, I know you can't get into specifics here, but do you have any success stories you can share in general terms?
I do. I have several success stories that I can share, but I will, most of them, the common theme is we've had several people who were in crisis. They've called, they've reached out, and then we have been very fortunate that they've reached out again later when they weren't in crisis, and they thanked us. And they said that, if it hadn't been for you guys, I wouldn't be here. So it means a lot. We don't always get that, but when we do, we hold on to it.
Yeah. Has that happened to you personally?
Not me personally, no. But I think, just being a part of a team, we all share that because we all chip in whenever there's a crisis, whether it's getting somebody who's on the phone a resource so they can stay seamlessly in that conversation with somebody in crisis. So we all chip in.
Now, on the other end of that, if somebody calls you in crisis and things don't go well, is there help for the person who's picking up the call? Because I can just put myself in their shoes and I can just think, that's a tough situation to live through. You're there to help somebody and maybe you take it personally that it didn't work out the way you hoped it would. And I imagine there's not a 100% success rate. So what happens in that case? Do you have counseling for the counselors?
We do. We have systems set up to help those who have the call to care for people who are in crisis. We do have, we are fortunate, we work with Burrell Behavioral Health, and they have wonderful employee assistant programs and other programs that are available to us, such as Be Well. And then we have debriefings within our own team because we are all debriefing trained. Our supervisors step in and they check in, hey, do you need a minute? Do you need a break? What can I do for you? There's a lot of support. 988 also offers support through Vibrant. They do monthly debriefings for all the crisis counselors that answer calls. So there are just a lot of avenues for people to get what they need.
I imagine it takes a really special person to be there on the other end for someone in crisis.
I think, knowing these people and what they've shared with me, just how they've they've come about to work in crisis, it does take a special person. It takes, sometimes it's taken an event of their own or a family event. Maybe they're a survivor of suicide loss, or maybe they just have so much compassion it just, oozes out of them, and they want to get it. They want to get it to the community. So it takes a lot of love to do what we do.
Now, one thing that did concern me when I was doing the research, and correct me if my research is out of date, is that Missouri doesn't have a long-term funding plan at this point to fund what is an important service. So are you advocating to change that, to make sure there's a long-term funding plan?
I think it's every director's goal to advocate for more funding, always. And so there are things happening to advocate for more funding, but I can tell you, because crisis services is not new in Missouri, it's one of those things that it will continue because, like I said, we work with Burrell Behavioral Health, right? That's who my employer is. They've had the ACI crisis line for 35 years, and so unless we get some extra wonderful funding that can keep it how it's going now, what we'll do is we'll just we'll keep continuing the service as is,
So based on the research I did, and this is from July, which is why I asked if this has been updated, is only about 10 states have set up funding through a 911 fee on cell phones or some other mechanism, and there are a handful of other states, 5 or 6. Missouri and Arkansas not in that basket at this point. So if you were able to talk to a lawmaker right now, or if a lawmaker happens to be watching, what would you tell them in Missouri or Arkansas about making sure there's a long-term plan to keep this funded not only next year, but 15, 20 years down the road?
I would just say, let's have a meeting, let's talk numbers, and let's see what we can do to keep crisis services front and center. We've been behind the curtain for so long, and over these past, 2 years, we've been having a spotlight shown on us, and it has been fantastic. So I would just ask them to meet with me and let's talk.
So based on the numbers we talked about earlier, I'm doing quick math, which isn't a great thing to do when you're talking to somebody and you're kind of basically 500 to 600 to 700 calls a month is what is coming in.
Yes, through the 988 line by itself. We answer more than just the 988 line.
Okay, that's just the 988 line.
Yes.
So 500 to 700, somewhere in that range each month.
Yeah.
And there's probably no way to burrow down into those numbers and say success, failure, we don't know, or is there?
I think when it comes to working with people, I try to stay away from the words success and failure because it's so individualized. And so if we were wanting to break it down into that, I would want to do more of a community poll to see if them reaching out felt like a success or a failure, if we needed to have improvement. I think for us, it's more so, did we work with them and get them a resource, or did we work with them and maybe we dropped the call and we had to call back and we couldn't make a connection? I wouldn't count that as a failure. More so, I would just count that as a missed opportunity due to some technical difficulties, or maybe they were in a situation where they couldn't answer that call again.
Yeah, and that's what I was getting at was I imagine it's hard to quantify this. So if you're going to talk to the lawmaker to say 90% of the time we were able to turn the situation around, or 10%, I imagine there's not a way to do that, to go to the lawmaker and say this really makes a difference.
I think that in the way that you're explaining it, no, we couldn't do that. But the way I would possibly explain it to a lawmaker is look at our 911 call rate. How many times has a crisis call ended in a 911 call? And I can tell you it's not many. We've really worked at increasing our use of least restrictive means when it comes to a crisis intervention. So least restrictive means is what can we do as a crisis specialist, as a mental health provider, to keep people from having an interruption in their day-to-day life? How can we help them with this crisis without putting them in fear of losing their job, putting them in fear of losing their kids? How can we help them be the better, feel better or on their journey to wellness without causing more stress?
And that's a success.
That would be a success to me.
So Springfield has one of the highest rates in the state of Missouri, and last I heard from one of our stories, is we're even above the national average for suicide.
Mm-hmm.
Is this 988 line, is this just a small piece of helping turn that number down, instead of having it keep going up and having us be above the national average, helping more people? Or do you think this is a big component of that?
I think it's one component, definitely. I don't want to say that it's big or small, just because it's there when it's needed. And for someone calling, it might be the biggest component, but for someone else, it might just be a small component. It might more rely on a referral to a service to get them connected to Medicaid. Crisis services within the Southwest counties here in Missouri is so much more than just the hotline. We have a lot of different programs, and they are all free. All crisis services within Burrell Behavioral Health are free and available.
Well, tell me about it.
Yeah, sure. So I'm glad you're letting me. We have the crisis continuum, of course, which is someone to call, which is the hotline. Then we have someone to respond, which is mobile crisis, where we can get a team out to the person in crisis if those telephonic interventions just aren't really helping them, if it's not enough, if they need more. And then we also have somewhere to go, which is the Behavioral Health Crisis Center, or the BHCC. We have a lot of acronyms in crisis. It's one of our favorite pastimes is to come up with acronyms.
So if someone is out
Yeah.
there and they're watching this
Mhm.
and they're getting information on this and they're facing a crisis and they're saying, am I the right person to call? Should I call? Is it serious enough that I need to call? What would you tell that person who may be watching, trying to learn more about 988 and whether or not they need help or they need to get help from one of these programs?
I would say anybody who's not in a medical emergency is the appropriate person to call. Whether or not that's you're questioning whether or not you're the right person to call. Let's have a conversation. Let's figure out if we can help you. Let's say you misplaced your car keys. You're feeling a little dysregulated. Call. Let's walk you through. What do you have a safety plan? Do you have something that helps you whenever you get stressed? If you are contemplating suicide, if you're just having thoughts of suicide, if you know somebody who's having thoughts of suicide, call. But if you have a medical emergency and you do not have time to have a discussion, if you need help immediately, you do need to call 911 so you can get that help sent out to you immediately.
So I do want to differentiate between 911 and 988. So
Yes.
911, we've been taught, don't flood 911, don't call unless it's an emergency. You're saying with 988, if you think it's an emergency or you're having a bad day, it's okay to call.
So I'm gonna reframe what you just said there.
Okay.
If you think it's a crisis, go ahead and give us a call. If you think it's an emergency, let's go ahead and call 911, because there is a difference between an emergency and a crisis. And really, that emergency for me is whenever you are needing medical attention.
Okay. So
yeah.
if you need medical attention.
Yes.
Any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
I think it's just an amazing experience to get to be in a state that is very invested in their citizens' mental health. To see where we have come over the last 3 years has just been phenomenal. The fact that I'm even standing here talking to you is just amazing. so I can share what we need to do to get the help to the people that need it.
Okay. Thanks for what you do for
Thank
the
you.
community. We appreciate it. Natasha with Burl Behavioral Health on
Hi.
this Live Life Well.
That was a great discussion, Paul, with Natasha from Burl Behavioral Health, excuse me. As we approach 988 Day, actually,
Yeah.
you guys talked so much about the 988 line, what it is, what it means, how important it is, and 988 Day is meant to really spread that message as far and wide as possible.
Spread it and say that this is available, to get the word out there that if you are in a position where you need help, you can get the help. And the theme for the very first 988 Day, which is on 9/8, September 8th,
Coming up Sunday, right?
yes, is no judgment, just help. And this is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. It's the federal government. And the federal government is involved in this. They just want to get help to people because, as they say, someone dies by suicide every 11 minutes in the United States.
Which is a shockingly high number,
It's too high. It's really too high.
or rather low number in that case, right? But because of how frequent it is, it's very high frequency.
And they want to do everything they can as an agency to spread the word. And they do have private groups. The United Church of Christ is getting involved with the initial 988 Day. And the United Church of Christ is urging its pastors to get involved with the No Judgment, Just Help 988 Day. And they're calling it the 988 Faith in Action Weekend. So if you go to services this weekend on Sunday, don't be surprised, especially if you go to the United Church of Christ, a church in that denomination. You're going to hear about it more than likely. But you may hear about it in other faiths because they're trying to spread the word through Christian organizations. They don't want people to die. They want them to know that they have help. You're in crisis at that particular moment. It doesn't mean that you can't weather the storm and go on and live your life. You're kind of stuck in a moment, in a crisis, and that's why they want people who are professionals, unlike me. You reach out to them, and they know how to talk you through what you're facing at that moment. That may feel like it's overwhelming, but these professionals have a good way of putting perspective on things. Just reach out and get that help. So worship leaders, they might offer a moment of silence for suicide loss survivors, and then they might share the 988 number with the congregation. So you might expect to see that this weekend when you're in church. If you go to a church service, your pastor, your reverend might be up front telling you about this or making it part of the sermon.
Which is fantastic. I'm going to go back live, or full here rather, to the screen over here. They've got a few ideas here under the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration website of where it says 988 Day. You mentioned the slogan, no judgment, just help. Some ideas of how you can get involved and be helpful even if you're not a professional.
Right.
Creative social media content, maybe spotlighting things that would generate more awareness for 988 Day. This says, create a 988 Day playlist using platforms like Spotify or SoundCloud with songs that make you feel good and tag hashtag 988 Day. I love that.
Yeah, and this may sound like it's light, you know, and we're talking about a very heavy, serious topic,
Without
and this
question.
may sound light, but the whole idea is just to get that number out there, the 988 number, because as we mentioned in the conversation, not everyone knows about it.
No.
And we did a story this year about the Busick State Forest in Christian County, the Missouri Department of Conservation putting up signs there and saying, because they had somebody go to the forest and commit suicide, and as they said, one is too many. And we just want people to take a second to think before they act. And if they have this number there, maybe they'll reach out to somebody and get the help they need in that moment and be able to live a long and fruitful life.
I remember first learning about it and thinking, what is that? Is that 911? Or is that different? And then when I found out what it was, which I found out pretty quickly being here in the newsroom, I thought, wow, what a great idea. I can't believe we haven't had that already, right? So you're right. Not a lot of people, maybe a lot of people don't know about it. And I think that's another reason why the suggestions here again are to maybe add a banner or a picture to one of your social media pages, because you may have a friend or a family member who comes across this, sees it and thinks 988, what is that? And then they'll Google it and they'll stumble upon one of these websites. Maybe they'll even stumble upon Burrell's website, and then they can get the same education that you were able to provide with your interview, and they may not have that information right now, and it may not be pertinent for them, but maybe they can pass it along to somebody who really needs it.
And one thing we talked about that I want to emphasize again is if you're in a position where you don't want to talk to somebody, this 988 number is set up so you can text.
That's right.
So all you got to do is text hello, and then the conversation will follow from there. It doesn't have to be a phone call if you're more comfortable with texting, and a lot of people grew up in the age where you don't pick up the phone and call. So that's really great that this line was set up to be able to do that, to be able to have texting as part of the service.
Yep, as you can see right here, I highlighted it. You can call or text 988, so it's not just having to call and talk to somebody over the phone. I do think it's important too, and you discussed this in your interview, Paul, that if you are in danger or having a medical emergency, it's still best to call 911. And I thought that was good that you were able to clarify that at the end of the interview, just so that you're not wasting potentially precious seconds or minutes by calling 988 first.
Right.
If you're in an emergency or having a medical issue, that's when you call 911. But this 988 option is also there for you in a potential crisis situation.
And they do want to get the message out that if you are in a mental health crisis, call 988. At some point, they hope 988 is as well known as 911, but they do serve different purposes. So again, if you're facing a mental health crisis, that number is 988. You can text or call. All you got to do is text and say hello.
That's it. Just say hello.
Yeah.
As you can see here on the Burrell's website, just say hello.
Yeah, it's right there.
988 National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. And I believe, I guess that starts the conversation, right? Then they know
what to do.
They know what to do from there. So, and you can see down here at the bottom, there's a little bit of a tab. That's a 24-hour crisis line. So this is not 9 to 5, right? This is not banker's hours. So you've always got the option to be able to reach out should you need it. I thought this was very informative stuff, Paul. You mentioned it's very heavy.
It's a very heavy topic.
But it's important. And this is the month where the focus on trying to raise awareness for these types of issues is the highest. Maybe it's something that we should be focused on all the time. But we'll start with September and try and make a little bit of a difference that way.
If we can, by having talks like this, have somebody just stop for a second and think, and then realize their own value in our society, that they do have something to contribute, we've been a success.
I agree. Paul, thank you very much. And thank you for watching here on KY3. That's this week's Live Life Well.
News.